Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Mokwariola. In the last few decades, corruption has evolved into an institution, ensuring that millions remain deprived, displaced and disadvantaged at the expense of a selfish few. With graft often perceived as the bane of underdevelopment across Africa, hundreds of Kenyans marched the streets of Nairobi in protest against widespread corruption in the country. And so we ask, what are your thoughts on the menace and the scourge of corruption across Africa? You can join the conversation and share your thoughts with us on Twitter at TVC News NG. We take a report now, and Africa Today will continue. Welcome on board.
Hundreds of protesters marched through the streets of Nairobi last Thursday against increased cases of high-level corruption. The protesters were angered that corrupt government officials are not being apprehended and no high-ranking official has been jailed. 24 civil servants and business people were charged a week ago with involvement in the theft of nearly $100 million of public funds and will stay in custody pending a June 4 hearing on their application for bail.
We have reached a point where we do not have a limit. It's just so immoral. I felt bad and thought I should join the others instead of commenting on Facebook.
Corruption makes others lose opportunities. If you look at our roads, our hospitals, job opportunities, they've all been neglected because of corruption. And if we continue with this trend, most likely in the next 5 years, we will not have a country.
That is why I purpose today to be here, to join my colleagues and ensure that our voice is heard.
The suspects, who include the Public Service Ministry's Principal Secretary, pleaded not guilty to charges that relate to theft at the government's National Youth Service. The NYS is a state government agency that trains young people and deploys them to work on projects ranging from construction to traffic control. President Uhuru Kenyatta pledged to stamp out graft when he was first elected in 2013. But critics say he has been slow in getting top officials in his government. No high-profile convictions have occurred since he took office. Kenyan authorities will investigate 10 financial institutions suspected of handling funds that were stolen from the government's National Youth Service, NYS.
Welcome back. Kenya is considered among the world's most corrupt countries. It is ranked 143rd out of 180 nations by Transparency International in its latest annual corruption index. From Cape Town to Cairo, Africa is often dubbed as a rich continent, perhaps for its enormous mineral and human resources, yet home to some of the poorest people on earth. Joining me on Skype, I have Uche Igwe, Doctorate Research Fellow, University of Sussex, United Kingdom. And on phone, I have Elias Mutama, a lawyer and social commentator in Nairobi, Kenya. Good to have you gentlemen on the program at this time.
Oh yeah, thank you, Esther.
Let me begin with you now, Dr. Uche. From what we saw earlier in the report, the people aren't happy with the level of corruption in Kenya. But what are your thoughts on how the matter has been handled in the country so far, and of course other countries in Africa, in terms of corruption?
Well, I do not want to hold brief for the Kenyan government, but a couple of days ago, I think it was yesterday, I saw that the president of Kenya, President Uhuru Kenyatta, did say that all permanent secretaries and government parastatals are going to undergo a lie detection test. I think probably he was responding to the preponderance of corruption. But I think that Kenya as a country shares some similarities with Nigeria. And I'll tell you why. Kenya is a multi-ethnic country. And sometimes I would like to consider, ethnicity and nepotism and political corruption, as the background that produces bureaucratic corruption. So I think that what is clear here is that because of the multi-ethnic nature of Kenya, and of course Kenya's sort of addiction to ethnic politics, there is a whole lot of political corruption, and inevitably, it is the political corruption that produces bureaucratic corruption. My sense is that even though collective action is useful, I think it is important to first tackle corruption in the roots, and that is by tackling political corruption and nepotism before we now begin to think about tackling the consequences, and that is bureaucratic corruption. So for me, those who are protesting, those who are taking to collective action are doing the right thing. But I think that it is incumbent on the government to take, a look at themselves and look inwards to make sure they start by tackling political corruption first.
Right. Now, Elias, from what Dr. Uche Igwe is saying right here, this is something that most people would say, yes, this is what has to be done if we're to tackle corruption holistically. But yes, then again, we have issues where powers that be find it so difficult to handle corruption cases. Take, for instance, maybe their friends, their relatives, and all of that. Why is it so difficult to nip corruption in the bud?
Thank you, Esther. It's really unfortunate and saddening for Kenyans that we are making headlines for the wrong reasons. Because we as Kenyans cannot even believe why we cannot be able to deal with this dragon of corruption. All I think is that there is no political goodwill by those who are in leadership to handle the issue of corruption, because I believe most of them, or the majority, are actually beneficiaries of corrupt practices. Because we had a similar scandal last year, pitting the same institution, that is the National Youth Service, where an amount of over 790 million was lost in very suspicious situations. Today we are talking about another 9 billion that has been lost through scandalous activities. And when we look at how this money was lost, you discover that there was collusion from high government officials to ensure that money is lost, because you find that money was wired through banks, and we have a lot of laws and a lot of guidelines to ensure money is not lost. But where was central bank when this money was being lost? Because money was not exchanged under the table. It must have been wired through banks. So why can't we trace this amount? So we are saying there is collusion from top government officials. In as much as the president is talking about it, we think that this is just a PR exercise, because they are the same people who are benefiting from it. If they want to tackle this, there are many they will tackle it, but they do not have the goodwill to fight corruption.
In other words, political will is a prerequisite if we're to deal with corruption holistically here. Am I correct, Elias?
Exactly. And we are saying that because we still can trace this money, because money is not something that can be, exhausted or utilized to completion. Where is the proceeds of corruption? If someone, for example, got money and they bought a house, they bought land, they bought vehicles, can we recover those assets and recover our money? Because it's something that we are able to trace. Because like I'm saying, if you're stealing 1 billion Kenya shillings, because we were saying very fictitious companies, people who supplied air, and they were getting millions of shillings in their accounts. Others were saying, I just saw money in my account. I had not done any transaction for this institution, but I got money in my account. So why can't we trace this money, recover the assets that were bought, and make sure that that money goes back to the public coffers? Because it's not that difficult if we really have the goodwill to do it.
All right, let me hold your thought for now, because the line is really poor at this time. But let's quickly go on a quick break. We hope to sort that out when we come back. You're watching Africa Today, and we've been looking at the menace of and scourge of corruption across Africa. Stay with us for more discussions in just a moment. Welcome back. The recent demonstrations in the city of Nairobi perhaps is unprecedented, as it coincided with the prayer breakfast that saw a reconciliation between Raila Odinga and President Uhuru Kenyatta. From political enemies to partners in progress, Odinga called on all sides of the divide to unite and rebuild Kenya. Now, Dr. Uche Igwe, from what we saw earlier in the video, online, we saw Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta in a reconciliation move just shortly after a breakfast meeting. And some say it is more like let's rebuild Kenya again. Let's forget the past and ensure that we move ahead so people get to enjoy the benefits of what they truly believe in Kenya. But what does this really mean? Do you think that is the end of the sour taste between the two parties?
Well, I think that is the beginning of the end. I watched those clips, and I think I should congratulate both President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga for that very, very important step of apologizing to one another and saying, let bygone be bygone. I think that is an important step, especially, in a country like Kenya, where there is a history of electoral violence, there's a history of a lot of ethnic bigotry. I think it's a beginning of good things for Kenya. But it is also important to find out whether this is just a propaganda and TV show, or whether it is really coming out of a heart of two leaders who want the country to make progress. What I think is that the steps they're going to take in the days and weeks to come are quite crucial. But for me, that that event that took place is something very unprecedented, and I think that is something that all lovers of Kenya, all lovers of Africa, all lovers of peace should applaud. So I wholeheartedly applaud the two leaders, and I wish them the best. And I also wish that they take concrete steps, to continue to reconcile, each other and their groups, especially the politicians, in the days and weeks to come.
Yeah, but a while ago you said this could be more of a propaganda or a TV show. But what do you think the two can do to go beyond, just being propaganda or TV show here?
Let it not be. I warn that it should not be. I mean, what I am saying is that in the weeks to come, what they do, whether they can walk the talk is another thing.
Right.
But for me, is an important step. But politicians, I mean, it could be they are just doing it for the sake of doing it. But I listened to the words the president used. I listened to the vice president. I listened to Raila Odinga and also the vice presidential candidate on his own side. And I believe that, it sounded like the minute. But again, they must walk the talk and bring out concrete actions, that will convince onlookers, that will convince Kenyans in the two sides of the divide that these leaders are serious. And if they do that, I am very certain that, they will, the leaders, the Kenyans will follow. If you recall, during the electoral violence that happened during the Mwai Kibaki era, you recall that both Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy William Ruto were on two sides of the divide, if you remember. Today, they are. And I also wish that they take concrete steps, to continue to reconcile, each other and their groups, especially the politicians, in the days and weeks to come.
Yeah, but a while ago you said this could be more of a propaganda or a TV show. But what do you think the two can do to go beyond, just being propaganda or TV show here?
Let it not be. I warn that it should not be. I mean, what I am saying is that in the weeks to come, what they do, whether they can walk the talk is another thing.
Right.
But for me, is an important step. But politicians, I mean, it could be they are just doing it for the sake of doing it. But I listened to the words the president used. I listened to the vice president. I listened to Raila Odinga and also the vice presidential candidate on his own side. And I believe that, it sounded like the minute. But again, they must walk the talk and bring out concrete actions, that will convince onlookers, that will convince Kenyans in the two sides of the divide that these leaders are serious. And if they do that, I am very certain that, they will, the leaders, the Kenyans will follow. If you recall, During the electoral violence that happened during the Mwai Kibaki era, you recall that both Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy William Ruto were on two sides of the divide, if you remember. Today they are on one side. So I think that that means that they can actually reconcile.
Yeah,
And for
it's
me,
quite a positive move, really. But
yes, it
aside
is a
from
positive move.
aside from this, gesture, what do you think can be done to change the level of perceived corruption in Kenya, even though this might be seen as a good development in Kenya?
Well, I think that every corruption is contextual. I think it is important to look at the contextual contours and the roots of corruption in Kenya. For me, ethnicism is a big issue. Of course, the Luos, the Luyas, the Kikuyus. If you look at, the history of Kenya, you remember that the Jomo Kenyatta and Jaramogi Odinga, the Odinga was the deputy to Jomo Kenyatta, and it's all between the Kikuyus on one side, the Luos on the other side, the Kalenjins on this side, the Luyas on the other side. It's all been ethnicism. So I think that this will be an opportunity for Kenyans to step back, to build a Kenyan, okay? To evolve a Kenyan society where you will not, first of all, call yourself a Luya, a Luo, a Kalenjin, a Kikuyu, but a Kenyan. And it's also a lesson for us as Nigeria. Of course, if you come back home here, you will see that, people are in a hurry to say, I'm Igbo, I'm Hausa, I'm Fulani, I'm Yoruba. And, it is important that both in Kenya and in Nigeria, we learn to become nationalistic. We want a Kenyan. We want a Nigerian. And I think that will be a beginning. I've always talked about this, that when there is trust among one another, among politicians, among ethnic groups, corruption dies slowly, okay? In countries like the Scandinavian countries, where social capital is very high, where trust in one another is very high, corruption is very low. So I think that both for Kenya and for Nigeria, the opportunity is to build trust, build cohesion, inter-ethnic trust, interpolitical trust, and intrapolitical trust.
Right.
And if we can be able to achieve that, both in Nigeria and in Kenya, for me, corruption will naturally begin to slow down and probably will become history without us leashing out some of these bureaucratic remedies that have not made a lot of difference in the past.
Now, Elias, let me quickly come to you now. From what from what the video, clearly showed online, there have been opinions that this unconditional ties with Uhuru represents more or less a bad deal for Raila Odinga. Do you share those sentiments?
Well, Esther, I think the handshake is good for the country because we have been polarized along, ethnic and political lines for a very long time. And as you're aware, and as it has been rightly pointed out, that this is a feud that started in the late 60s during the reign of the founder of this country, the Jomo Kenyatta, and who was Uhuru's father, and his deputy, the vice president, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, who was Raila's father. So this is something that has been there for a long time, and it has been affecting Kenyans for a very long time. So it is good to unify Kenya because we have been divided and we have had this hatred for a long time based on those two, disagreements. But then what does the handshake really mean for us as Kenyans? Because Raila Amolo Odinga has been, fronting himself as, the voice of the voiceless, the opposition leader. He has been a whistleblower for a very long time. So now that he seems to be in bed with the government, what does it mean for us? Does it mean that we do not have an opposition that is capable of checking the government? And because from the famous handshake, from the time it happened, we have not heard him talk about, the corruption that is taking place, the loss of the money that from the government coffers. So we are kind of wondering, what was the purpose of this handshake? Was it for personal gain or was it for, the greater good of the country? Because if it was for the greater good of the country,
right,
you then expect him to still continue keeping the government on its toes. It doesn't mean that now he, is blind and he's giving a deaf ear to the wrongs that are happening. So we would like him, in as much as there is a handshake, can we hear him talk about it and look Uhuru Kenyatta in the eye and say, I might have shaken hands with you, but I am not comfortable with what is going on in the country. But the more he keeps quiet, the more we are, tempted to think that maybe he was compromised or the handshake was for his own personal gain and not for the gain of the country.
But what do you think, Elias, when you saw that video? What were your thoughts?
Well, the fact that they have not, given us a clear roadmap and told us clearly this is how we intend to unify Kenyans, we remain very skeptical about that handshake. Because it's not the first time it's happening. We've seen, opposition and government reconcile before. So we are waiting, and we are waiting with bated breath to see whether this marriage will, last or whether it will just be for a short time and whether it's only meant to achieve very little or, just for personal gain.
As much as we hope for the best in Kenya, what do you think should be the unifying factor for all Kenyans here, irrespective of the differences and from what we understand, where the people are against the government's, handling of corruption?
Well, we will not remain unified because we still think that those who are in power, they are out there to loot public money. And unless the government really comes out clearly and disassociates itself with corruption, we'll always feel that we have been sidelined. We'll always feel that we've been shortchanged. So no amount of handshake will heal that unless we are able to slay that dragon of corruption until we see that we can trust those that are in power to use money in an accountable manner. So unless that happens, we cannot talk of healing because we cannot be talking about healing when money that is meant for hospitals, money that is meant for schools, money that is meant for development is going to private pockets. Because it's only last year when we had doctors go for a strike for almost 3 months and they were told there is no money. When you look at the money that is being lost through corruption, it's 3 times or 4 times what the doctors would have gained if they were given their dues. So then until that is settled and addressed, we cannot be talking about unifying Kenyans because we still have those that have and those that do not have.
Quite a point there. But if I were to take this home forward, what is the way out of this quagmire in terms of corruption that we keep dealing with in Africa?
Well, to me, I would say taking those who are involved in corruption to court is not enough because at the end of the day, and we have seen them arraigned in court from last week, others are still in remand, but they cannot be in remand forever. They will have to be released at some point on bail or bond. So what I would say is let those that are involved in corruption feel the pinch. How? Let them lose property that they have gained through corruption. If it's a house that you bought and we can do a lifestyle audit because before you got to government, you owned 1 car or you just lived in a very simple house. But 1 year after you get to government, you're living in a mansion, you're driving Range Rovers, you've got a 360 roundabout on your lifestyle, then we ought to audit your lifestyle. And we find that there are properties that you gained, unfairly or that you cannot explain. Let those properties be seized. Let's recover the money that was lost. Until we start recovering money that was lost, then we are not fighting corruption.
All right. Thank you very much, Elias, for your contribution. Now, let me quickly come to you, Dr. Uche Igwe. What are your final thoughts on this issue right now?
Well, I think that, the speaker from Kenya hit the nail at the head. It is important to make sure that those who have wealth that they cannot explain be made to explain them. And it's also important to find a way when these monies are recovered, they are utilized for the benefit of the common good. And if you recall, back home here in Nigeria, there has been a lot of pressure also coming from civil society to say all the monies recovered by this government and by previous government should be accounted for, should be applied, for the benefit of the poor. Same with Nigeria, same with Kenya. But one thing I must say is that the collective action must continue.
Right.
People on the streets, citizens and civil society groups must continue to put pressure on government to become accountable. And for me, it is also important for the government of Kenya and the opposition to bring out a clear roadmap. I think that shaking hands should not stop the opposition from being opposition. I think the credibility Raila Odinga has at the moment is that he's perceived to be on the side of the people. It is up to him, whether to continue that way by continuing to be the voice of the voiceless or through this handshake, compromise. It's up to him. And for me and for many observers, what will happen in the coming days or weeks will allow us make up our minds.
Well, we'll wait to see what happens in the coming weeks or so. Thank you very much, Dr. Uche Igwe, for your analysis. And I also thank my guests from Kenya, Elias Mutama, for your contribution as well on Africa Today.
Thank you very much.
From Ghana to South Africa, Nigeria to Kenya, Africa continues to witness made-for-movie moments, retaining the usual storylines of massive corruption, gross mismanagement, and relentless abuse of office by the political class. While graft remains an obstacle to sustainable development, advocacy, action, and strong civil society will go a long way in breaking the cycle of crookedness and close down the gap of inequality. Well, that is our package for today, but don't forget to join the conversation as usual on Twitter @TVC News NG, and also follow me for updates around Africa at Esther TVC News. Until the next one, I am Esther Omakwariola, and always remember, Africa can only get better.